Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and you can see I've got some food set up. I want to feed this bin right here. This is a bin of African night crawlers. They're composting worms. And I'm composting in all of these systems here, buckets, bins, bags, you name it. And this system at 170 days of age is kind of ancient in my systems. A lot of times by this time I will have already harvested the system, but at 170 days of age, I'm still putting food in here. This would actually be its 17th feeding today, which kind of works out nicely. 17 feedings over 170 days, that averages to a feeding every 10 days. And this is actually the system where we had been previously doing the layered feeding pattern, kind of referring to it as the lasagna feeding pattern. But we decided last week when we checked in here that there was really not enough cardboard paper type materials with which we can continue stacking up layers. So we bought the whole lasagna feeding thing to an end, but it doesn't mean we're going to stop feeding. So I'm going to be putting these little bits of food in there today. So I'm going to get this thing up on the bench and we're going to get to work. So the only thing that you see here that they're not getting is the actual filters. I'll set those aside, use them in a slightly younger bin where there's time for that stuff to break down. In my older bins, I try to limit the feedings to stuff that I know is going to go pretty quickly. Oh, let me go get a glove on. And during the last feeding in this bin, we gave them coffee then too, and probably no filter then either. And the food item that they got then was pumpkin, and it wasn't even that much. It was a couple of chunks, maybe that size. So my guess is that in the time that's passed, they've probably eaten it. Oh, check that out. What you're seeing right there is two pairs of worms mating. So they look like they're just tied together in knots. And these two on the left, they seem like they're most jumbled up. These guys are pretty jumbled up too. Wow, look at that. It's pretty interesting. I always feel bad interrupting these little guys when they're in the middle of doing this, and it seems like they like doing it on the surface, because it's always out here that I spot them doing it, although I'm sure it's happening all over the place. Wow, that was pretty fast. You can already see that this little pair, so I was going to say this little guy, but this pair has already, even while they were still connected, it seems, they've gone right below into the material here. These two are perhaps not as, thrown off by me being here or the bright lights being on overhead. But my guess is once we start working in here, these guys are going to split too. It's kind of nice. There's a good amount of moisture, maybe some fresh castings even out here on the top surface. That plastic bag that was covering things here on the top is doing a pretty nice job keeping the moisture level in here nice and high. Help the worms remain cozy. So yeah, I mean, it was pretty interesting for all that time, and we were coming in here. I think 13 of those, well, 16 up until now. Today will be 17 feedings, but 13 of the feedings were, stacked up in layers, affectionately referred to as a lasagna style feeding. And the only thing that remains of all that anymore, I think, is the sort of salvaged bits of bedding that we collected last time we checked in here and fed. So every time I stumbled on something that looked like, maybe an uncomposted chunk of food or a piece of larger leftover bedding, I set it aside so that we could kind of lay it down underneath the feeding so that it's in a spot where it's going to get a good amount of attention. And this being where we last fed, I assume we're going to start bumping into either food or bedding. We'll do the same now. I think instead of thinking of it later and treating it as an afterthought, right from the start, I'm going to do my best to try to collect up the bedding bits that we're going to want to drop in below today's feeding. A lot of moisture here. It almost makes me wonder if it might also be time to swap out the plastic coverings here to allow for a little bit of this moisture to start leaving the bin. I could easily swap that out for just a piece of newspaper. And these castings will do just fine. They wouldn't dry out too much. This is almost purely castings anymore, this system. So there I go, being haphazard. I guess I figured if I saw anything that was worth grabbing and setting aside, it would pretty much be out there on the surface. This shows us that there's also a little bit of leftover pumpkin here that these guys are still trying to polish off since the last time we checked in here. So I'm glad that I didn't bring too much stuff. Stuff that I bought, as I showed you earlier, it's carrots, peels of cucumbers. There's also white carrots in there. I don't know if those have a different name. I think they're maybe parsnips or whatever they're called. And there was also, I think, a few blackberries in there. So it was just kind of a smorgasbord mix of different things I had thrown in there. Here's another chunk of kind of a piece of paper or cardboard or something. All good stuff that we could sprinkle down beneath the feeding. I just don't want to add more bedding to a system that's this old, knowing that, you know, it takes so long to break down. I'm just going to end up with a bunch of leftover bedding bits in here. But, you know, there's really not a whole lot. I found a couple little skins of pumpkin. Most of the meaty, you know, fruity, what is it, fruit, vegetable? I don't even know. I guess it's a vegetable. Most of the vegetable matter has been nibbled off, but they'll eat those skins too once it breaks down a little further. It does seem to me like this whole system probably would benefit from a good, like just a basic general tilling up. So I think last time too, we kind of went down the middle looking for leftovers, knowing that that's where all the, you know, layers of everything had been, but I don't think we spent a lot of time on the outer perimeter of the system. So maybe this will be a good chance just to give us a good overall sense of how this whole bin is coming along. I think that was one of the reasons too that we ended the whole lasagna layer stuff, was because it did seem like it would be time to start steering this thing towards harvest. And there's tons of great castings in here. There's obviously little bits of leftover this and that in here too. For some reason I think this is a tea bag. It just looks like a little ball of lint or something. But I think I've been bumping into this thing regularly, and it's continuing to just show wear and become less and less. So it's also something that they evidently like. This is kind of good too, I think, because all the stuff that was down here near where the food was pretty damp, but the stuff out here on the edges feels a lot more crumbly and loose. I think by combining all this stuff together, we'll end up with some really nice material. The stuff that I encountered in the beginning that was a little bit more damp made me worry a little bit that, hey, this is possibly more damp than it needs to be, but I'm getting the sense now that if we just combine things, we're going to level off at a pretty nice point. And you know, since we're still composting in here, the moisture is kind of important. These foods, as they thaw, they're all frozen, so they'll thaw and they'll kick out moisture. Although there's really no lack of moisture in this system. It's very nice, very nice. Okay, I kind of get into la la land admiring the castings. What a nice job these worms have done. And I did find a few more things, another tea bag. There's other things in here too, which I think at some point might just get caught in a screen or something if we end up screening this material. I mean, I don't always screen my castings before using them, but more recently I've been getting into the habit of doing so. All right, so you know what? Let's just do a quick till up of the other side, and then we can open up a hole down the middle. Maybe we'll have a better collection of leftover bedding and stuff that we can throw in beneath the food, and then we'll be good to go. Some leftovers, some more pumpkin bits. Definitely not much though, although perhaps more than I expected, you know, because considering how few little bits of pumpkin I threw in here, I thought they'd be, you know, history in no time. But you never know what the worms are going to do. They're predictable to a certain point, but they can often surprise you. It's kind of nice just to open up any part of the bin and till it up and find it chock full of worms. I think in the process of rebuilding the layers each time, we somehow kept pushing food scraps definitely down to the bottom, so the very bottom was always loaded with tons of stuff from the previous feedings as we rebuilt the lasagna layers, if you want to call them that, and we did call them that. all the stuff that, you know, came from before, earlier feedings, of which there wasn't enough to actually create like a layer of its own. That stuff always sort of ended up in this smorgasbord mix of leftovers down at the very bottom. Seemed like the right place to put it. And I'm sure that the worms really like that, because there's all kinds of stuff at various points of decay and breakdown, all different types of flavors and consistencies, and you just really pig out and gorge yourself down in that lower level. But at this point, there's really not going to be a lower level anymore. I think last time we did nothing like this in terms of disturbing the overall arrangement of things. And did I just, speaking of disturbing things, I had a little collection of stuff over here. Such a scatterbrain. Whatever. I do that all the time. Not all the time, but I definitely remember recently doing something similar to that. Trying to arrange my stuff in a particular spot and then burying it or forgetting where I left it or whatever. Alright, this is really nice stuff. I bet you this combining materials with varying levels of moisture is going to help the material a great deal. All of a sudden it all just seems to flow and crumble. Not flow, because look at that, it's still kind of mushy, right, in certain places. But it does pretty readily crumble and break apart, which is almost perfect. Just a little bit more damp than it needs to be. But that's where we want it, I believe, at this point. Alright, let's get this thing fed. Just open up a quick hole and drop in today's feeding. It's so unusual. Something looking this not broken down or soaking in moisture or anything, it's got to be plastic. So I'm taking it out. Now that I'm looking at it more closely, I could definitely tell it's plastic. So yeah, there's certainly nothing like that in this system. Perhaps a little leftover chunk of food or bedding, but if you see something like that in a bin this old, there's a good chance it's artificial. Yeah, you know, I do have a little bit more room left in here. I think just the, you know, remaining space to work most recently was the main consideration I've been including when it comes time to, you know, decide if it's time to continue or not. If it's feeling like there's just no more room to, you know, work and stack things up so you can do things, then it might be time to bring the system to a close. All right, let's drop in the food. It is frozen, so maybe, you know what? We'll put some of the coffee in first as sort of a buffering or insulating layer. Then we won't feel so bad dropping in frozen materials on top of that. Let's see if we can blend in this coffee a little bit too with the surrounding stuff. All right, wormies, heads up, here it comes. This stuff is all here. Give you a closer look. There is a larger chunk of cucumber right there, which won't last. Here are the white and orange carrots and some more larger chunks of cucumber. Here's another end. That's cool. A little bit of juicy stuff in addition to just the peels. And the berries, blackberries. Kind of forgotten in the corner of the refrigerator and sort of dried out. It's like berry raisins, if there is such a thing. Okay, it's already melting, so the moisture down the middle will probably increase again just from the dampness that this food brings. You know what? These filters spilled a little bit of their contents. Let's give it to the worms, right? And I think there's not much left to do here than cover up. You know, a system this old after so many feedings, it's probably safe to assume that there's been, you know, grit applied on numerous occasions in the past, and that it probably doesn't need it. So I'm not going to worry about including grit with today's feeding or bedding. The only bedding they're getting is leftovers. And I'm starting to wonder if this might be the final feeding for this system. Even though there's room enough to continue working in here, I sometimes wonder if the material that they're inhabiting is already so, you know, dense in castings that it might be a little bit unhealthy for them to be in it. I can't really tell from looking at it or anything how much, you know, bedding material still remains mixed in with this stuff. So maybe it is better to be a little bit more on the cautious side and get this system geared up for harvest at some point soon. Get these beautiful castings out of here, and maybe more importantly, get these worms working on some fresh material, you know. So, always fun checking in on these African night crawlers. These are not the northeast worms, African night crawlers. These are the African night crawlers that came to me as cocoons originally from Emily the Crazy Worm Lady. So I've had these for a couple years now, I think. And, well, you know what? Let's stick with the plastic, at least for a little while longer. And then at some point soon, maybe we'll switch over to something that allows for some more drying. But I think we're good now as far as moisture goes. All right, everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.